I don't think it's an underestimation to say that it was one of the most powerful companies that have ever existed, and potentially even the most corrupt. And after a few years, some of these are forgotten, and it's because people move on. We've got busy lives, and we're all left with consequences, though. Even though these have been forgotten, there's still consequences to us. That's the consequence of power. It has ramifications for the normal person. The East India Company, to be clear, was obviously a major contributor to the British Empire expansion. And this company had armies. It was at one point the army was bigger than the British army, a 250,000.
Wow.
But AI is like an express train. It's happening. It's you and I are not going to be able to stop it.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Community Hour. My name is Arif Faizi and I'll be hosting the Community Hour on both Awaaz FM as well as on Fiesta FM. And as always on the Community Hour, we have so many different topics we like to talk about. And today we're going to be talking to a writer. So a little bit of a background. Consequence of Power is a historical fictional book set in 1763. Now, this book entails intrigue, corruption, and the resilience of human spirit. The author, Sabrina Lund, is an English-Danish writer with a lifelong passion for literature. Sabrina, welcome to the Community Hour.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
And almost read your book. Few pages left, but I have enjoyed it and it's really good. But so it's great that you're here. You've taken time out and we're going to talk a little bit about your book. But as always, I like to always understand the journey. What made you get into it? So now you have, or you still a bit of a sabbatical, I suppose, in your career in finance. You hold an MSc in finance from the London School of Economics. However, before your career in finance, you also studied at Exeter University. So tell us, what did you study before then?
Well, my family's always had a passion for literature, and we had a lot of debates at the dinner table with literature, plays, the arts. And so naturally, I found myself studying literature at Exeter University very broadly. And then I also studied Shakespeare at UCL as a master's. But I feel it's worth mentioning here as well that writing can also have a really direct relevancy on finance, which might not be well understood. But especially in my role, I write engaging pieces, or hopefully engaging pieces, on market outlooks, themes, and try and resonate with my audience and the clients and try and distill complex ideas for the client. So there's been a bit of an overlap there.
I see. So anyone who is studying English, literature or languages, there's always other careers that they can also go into, which is always very interesting to know. But you're raised in London and Copenhagen. So tell us about your time growing up in two different countries. And do you think this also played a role in your writing?
Absolutely. Well, I've spent in total 25 years in London, so I've understood well the stresses of city life, a faster pace, the politics and the business side of things and social constructs. They're very apparent to me. Whereas I've moved to Hampshire about 4 years ago, and the Hampshire countryside, it feels a little bit, for me, a little bit of a more slower pace.
Of course, compared to London, yeah.
It's very pleasant. I'm closer to nature now.
Yes.
And that certainly played a role in my writing. And in a very strange way, I feel Hampshire is slightly more aligned to Denmark. And that's because although we work hard, we're very entrepreneurial, there's more of a balanced lifestyle here compared to the metropolis, and more of a focus on family and nature from a very young age. Children are encouraged to go out in nature and understand that in Denmark, and I feel a lot more connected to nature in Hampshire.
Because there's some beautiful places within Hampshire. You've got the South Downs, you've got the rivers around here, so blue and green spaces, as we like to call them.
Absolutely.
You've got plenty of them in Hampshire, which is really nice. But you have a lifelong passion for literature, and you specialize from the Renaissance to the 19th century. What is it about this period of time that interests you then?
Yes. Well, it's hard to say I specialize in such a broad history, but it's got a lot of diverse and interesting figures, anything from Shakespeare to Jane Austen, as well as a lot of big historical events. So I'm most interested in things like the historical context and the social rules and as they apply to novels. So the historical context can really, it really impacts characters, and you can sort of understand, you can interpret a character based on some of the social rules and your knowledge of that history. Just a very classic example is Pride and Prejudice.
Which we all know about on TV, yes,
exactly.
as well. So yes,
that's a very loved in our household. Very loved.
Is it okay?
1995 version. But Mrs. Bennet, the mother in Pride and Prejudice, she's eager to have her 5 daughters married off, but the reason is because they're not able to inherit the family estate. So essentially, they're going to be homeless. They don't have a son. So she's eager to, and she's in hysterics most of the time because she's trying to marry off her daughters. Now, this seems very, she's seen as a very ridiculous character, but actually that's a very real concern of the day, especially in her social circles. So understanding that is quite important. We don't have those same concerns, but we can then sympathise with characters, understanding that historical context.
But there are different nations around the country that still believe in this still have those concerns.
That's true. There's definite overlap, and that's the beauty of sometimes these novels. They have universal themes that transcend time, and in this case, cultures as well. So they resonate with the reader in different ways. They can land with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yeah. Okay. Now, you've also done a lot of research into writing books. Writing this book, Consequence of Power. And you gained a lot of influence and inspiration and themes from other writers. So a great way of doing research and trying to, as we all do in every subject, even in science. But could you help us understand what influence you had from these writers, from the books that you wrote? So, and I've got a list of them that you did mention. So just try to make us understand, because I think it is important when you do writing a book is to get that research, but also I think it helps to, make some sort of... helps just to form bring in different concepts into the writing. But let's start with something that I have watched and I really enjoyed it, Warful by Hilary Mantel.
Yes. Well, that was mainly, the political machinations and the use of historical contexts. So I'm very interested in history, and then overlaying my own, sort of filling in the gaps and sort of the fictional sort of overlay of those gaps. That's what I've done in my own novel. So there are historical events in my novel, but then I have my own characters as well who are fictional, and I try and bring out and fill in the gaps of that. But also something like Jane Austen, for instance, and Georgia Hare, I think that's even more was even more of an influence, those particular authors, because they influenced my knowledge of the era. So Jane Austen was actually writing a little bit after my particular era, but there's a lot of conventions and overlap.
Oh, okay. And as well as Jane Austen being in Hampshire?
Well, exactly, a local author, exactly, yes. So they're very relevant. So that's Jane Austen, but Georgette Hare, so she's a historical novelist. So she's not writing in her time, she's writing about another era. So she was really famed for her historical research, her understanding of the accuracy of clothes and social codes. And I was conscious myself to paint a picture as well for the reader who might not know or understand the 18th century. So if you look at Jane Austen, you read her, she's not that interested in the intricacies of what a ballroom looks like, the real description. Because her readers, they'd experienced a ballroom. Many of them had. They understood a lot of the conventions. Whereas Georgette Hare, her readers don't necessarily know that. And I'm conscious my readers don't as well. So I don't take readers through a tour guide of a house,
yes.
for instance. That's, I use description as a way to convey certain things and characters and try and help the reader understand some of the conventions and what room we're walking into.
So that we could picture it in our mind.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. But you've also William Shakespeare.
Oh,
what
yes.
about him?
Well, he's very dear to my heart.
Okay, because you said you did a master's in Shakespeare, yes? Right.
Exactly, yes. So he's definitely he's influenced me. He's very multi-layered in his approach. He's got very rich poetic language, and he's got a lot of double meanings in his writing. And most importantly, I think he explores a lot of those universal themes that I was talking about earlier, which transcend time, such as love, power, which I talk about in my novel as well, death. These, transcend history and time, but at the same time, he's also very versatile in his comedy and tragedies, and sometimes he blends the two and gives a bit of comic relief. And I was very conscious to do that in my book. I talk about some very heavy themes, very serious themes, but then I also wanted to bring some lightness to the novel and give some comic relief to everyone so that they're not bogged down and there is some lightness and they can get through it quite easily.
I see, okay. But what about Greek mythology then?
Yes, well, that's interesting because So Greek mythology was very fashionable in the Georgian era, both in art and architecture. And I wanted to reflect that as part of the character of the era in my novel. But I also use it as a device, much like Shakespeare does sometimes, referencing Greek mythology and sort of coding it as in the story. So when you see, or I reference, say, a particular Greek god, for instance, you can read the story if you do a bit of research and to read further meaning into the novel. So just for example, there's a character which I describe as the statue, looking like the statue of Apollo, and another next to him who I describe as Hyacinth. Now, if you could just read the novel on a surface level, that's absolutely fine. But if you're interested and you look into that story, Apollo was friends with Hyacinth, who was a mortal, and they were playing together, and Apollo accidentally, I think they were playing discus, and Apollo kills Hyacinth. So when you read that reference in my novel, you can see that actually this accident which happens, it was an accident, it wasn't intentional, and there's deeper meaning and connection between those two characters, other than what one might see on the surface level.
I see. Okay. Wow. Right. So Consequence of Power, it's set in 1763. And the story is around an individual known as Isabella Thornbury. Beneath the grandeur of the 18th century London society, ballrooms lies a darker realms of political intrigue, secret societies, and power struggles. Why did you choose this particular time of 1763? And could you tell us more about this historical time?
Yes. Well, there's quite a few reasons, but I think this is a time period where it hasn't really been discussed in great depth, in popular society, especially now. And there are a lot of shocking events that happened, sensational issues, and some that have overlap today. So it's a time rich in culture and a lot of political change. And also, the East India Company was it was expanding empire at that time. So it was, I don't think it's an underestimation to say that it was one of the most powerful companies that have ever existed, and potentially even the most corrupt. And it had devastating effects across the world, of course. But then I've got this very important and vibrant backdrop in order to discuss themes such as power and our society. And it has a lot of overlap, I believe, in questions of today and power and society. And then on another sort of note, I did want to sort of look at, there's a trope, essentially, when in romantic historical novels, where Regency novels especially, where the heroine steps out into society for her first London season and she's going to make a marriage match. That's a very popular trope. If you think Bridgerton, that's, the premise of Bridgerton. And I thought, what if we flip that on its head? What if society is not as good as the heroine thinks, what if we look under the covers of, the underground world, these political machinations, the corruption and the power plays that are happening, and this hedonistic time as well. So there's this, what's going on the surface, and then let's actually delve underneath what's going on underneath. The novel actually begins at a time when we have Lord Bute being Prime Minister and Dashwood, he's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And
are these fictional characters or are they real characters?
They were real, actually real political figures. I have political and real figures in my novel. I fill in the gaps, but I do also have my fictional characters. And they had some really catastrophic failures in their very short tenure as Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I do find it ironic that we've forgotten about a lot of this. And it's not unsimilar to some politicians today. There's been some catastrophic failures, and after a few years, some of these are forgotten. And it's because people move on. We've got busy lives, and we're all left with consequences, though. Even though these have been forgotten, there's still consequences to us. That's the consequence of power. It has ramifications for the normal person.
So you can see some of these things happening today.
I think so.
That has happened before.
Yes.
Which we have forgotten.
Yes. History can repeat itself if we forget history, which I think in this case we have forgotten a lot of history.
And do you think remembering history is important?
Oh, yes.
And why is that? And why do you feel that it's important?
It's exactly that, the fact that we will forget,
And repeat.
And repeat,
yeah.
Exactly. That's the thing, I believe there's, we're dealing with the 7-Year War in this moment in history. And I have a character say, hopefully we never have this again. It's so atrocious. And yet we've forgotten this. This was the first global conflict, truly global conflict, which was happening. And yet we've had, in the 20th century, we've had 2 large, huge world wars, and we might even have some again, So clearly these have been forgotten, and lessons haven't been learned. They're in different contexts, but, it's just so atrocious, and yet we don't somehow...
So 7-Year War that occurred, but there was also a Treaty of Paris that also occurred. So could you tell us a little bit about the Treaty of Paris, which you mentioned, because you're celebrating the Treaty of Paris in your book? And
yes. Well, it was one of the things that led to Bute's downfall. It was a little bit unpopular, despite the fact that, the 7-Year War was very much to do with... Great Britain, having it out with France on, different territories and trade routes, very much, say, the North America, for instance. And
as well as North Africa.
So this was a global conflict, but they'd signed a Treaty of Paris, and actually it was quite favourable in terms of Britain. Actually, they gained a lot of land and territory over France, Canada, for instance, but it wasn't seen as very popular. And that was mainly because Bute himself wasn't very popular. So
he was the Prime Minister.
He was the Prime Minister at the time. And he wasn't popular because he was a favourite of the king. He was actually appointed by the king. And he didn't have that many political allies, really. So there's a lot to that.
Is that because in the book, and maybe in real life, he wasn't from the elite? He wasn't inherited wealth. It became because he was friendly to the king, because he was he was a teacher. I don't want to say too much of the book, but
he was I believe of the elite, but he was Scottish, and there was a lot of prejudice against Scots.
Right,
in
I
those
see.
days.
Okay.
But he did get close to the king's father, and that's how he became the king's tutor eventually. And sort of the king was seen as very young and vulnerable to his influence, Bute's influence. And eventually it was the king who helped him get into his position. And there's a lot to be said for the division of power. And well, we had a civil war because of it, frankly. I think back in Charles I, he was originally he lost his head basically because he thought that he could rule without Parliament, and then we ended up having a civil war in Britain. And eventually, when Charles II came to the throne, it was under the understanding that there would be the monarchy and Parliament. And it's the beginning of the constitutional monarchy as we have it today. So it's very important to have this division of Parliament and monarchy, so there's not this absolutism. Now, when Bute starts to influence the king, it starts blurring the lines, and we start seeing this merge of power, and that's very dangerous and unpopular, of course, because of this history. So he was seen as the favourite of the king. The king is meant to have objective advisors, not just one influencer really driving home his influence.
And hence the Glorious Revolution of 1688 to try and prevent all of these things.
Exactly.
And then when William of Orange came and became king, but gave up the control and allowed Parliament to rule the country.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
And nearly 100 years later, it feels like that it's changing because the country did become very rich with the East Indian Company, as you talked about. Yeah. Do you think that this time period, Britain became a very rich country, and that together with the East Indian Company and its global dominance, that political corruption did then manifest?
Yes, I mean, the East India Company, to be clear, was obviously a major contributor to the British Empire expansion. And this company had armies. It was at one point the army was bigger than the British army, a 250,000 people.
So there were more people who were employed by this company called the East Indian Company than the army of the country. Of United Kingdom.
Yes, so very powerful. And they were committing a lot of atrocities as well in the pursuit of their expansion. And they even had the power to tax those who are under their control. So they had a huge deal of power, in India particularly. So they also had the power because they were able to lobby Parliament and lobby Parliament in their favour to, vote on bills in their favour. And why was that? It was because MPs, a lot of them had shares in the company, and some of them were given shares in the company, and that would help, them vote in the company's favour. I mean, I would say that's a conflict of interest and corruption, so it's outrageous, frankly. But I think you've got to acknowledge there's a lot of things that were happening in those days which were more normalised, frankly. A lot of things that we would see as corruption, such as bribery, which were normalised in those days. And let's not forget, in Britain, who were voting. I mean, it was a very small section of society, maybe 5% is the elite members of society who were voting, not the average person. They didn't have a vote. Right.
And no women as well.
Of course, no women.
So no women, so only for the elite people who were voting.
Yes, landowners.
Landowners, right, okay. Which is very interesting, and I think I might ask you a bit later on, do you feel that this is happening now? But let's come back to that. Now this must have put some interesting psychological depth into writing this book. Now, how do you immerse yourself into these characters? And such as the wealthy elite, you've got the young Isabella Thornbury, who is a young lady herself. You've got the dowingers, which were people who are widowers in the book. You've got soldiers, you've got maids, lots of people in your book. But how would you then try to write about these characters? Because when I was reading the book, it came off like you knew about them. And which was really good because you're describing them as well, and you're painting a picture for us, which was really nice. But how do you do that as a writer?
Interestingly, a key to this for myself was acting, so becoming the characters. So for context, my partner Michael and I, we began this venture because we wanted to entertain ourselves. So I'm interested in novels. Michael and I, we also have a passion for period dramas.
Okay.
So 1995's Pride and Prejudice is a favourite. War and Peace, Gilded Age. We started running out of period dramas because this is a real passion of ours. So we thought we'd create our own drama, our own fun in the evenings and write it in novel form. So we really immersed ourselves in the characters. I would write, but then we would also act out the scenes. And we would see whether it landed, whether it really resonated. Are we embodying those characters? We try to visualize ourselves in a scene. Just for example, there's a scene where a character is a servant who's breaking into the office of his master. And we acted it out, and we felt, how would you feel in that moment? The creak of the floorboards suddenly becomes very apparent. The doorknob, the
moonlit.
The moonlight.
Yes,
exactly,
that's right. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So you can feel. What would you feel your heart beating? Would you feel the sweat on your what would your emotions be? How would you physically feel? And by acting it out, it did help. And also Michael, who's excellent at sort of testing me and critiquing, and really there's a lot of trial and error involved in as well, just seeing, does this sound authentic? Is it authentic? Can you feel it? So that was important for me.
Very interesting. What about the wealthy elite then?
Yes.
Well, what about the dowagers actually? So dowagers, the widowers, how would you act those parts then and play?
I had a voice in my head of how I felt Lady Ingram, this is one of the dowagers, would be. I felt that she needed to be, a lot of the characters in her sphere were sort of very comfortable, and we needed someone who could really propel the story forward and be a very strong force. So I had her in my head, that voice, and a sort of, she's almost a caricature, to be honest. So I just tried to act it out and feel her, and she sort of evolved whilst we were doing that, which is quite comical.
Yes, it is. And how would you know that they would be? Were they bored? Did they needed things to do, and hence, for example, taking on, in this case, Elizabeth Thornbury on to try and find a suitable man? Is that something that they would want to do because it was something for them to do?
I think they probably were bored. That's probably plausible. But someone like that, she was very connected in society. And in my novel, she's very grateful to the Thornburys, who are the ladies who she's introducing into society. And essentially, it's sort of her way of giving back to them, because she's connected and they are not as connected. And you really need someone to sort of be your ambassador, to forge the way into the social scene.
Is that what used to be the case in those days then?
Yes,
right.
I think you needed someone to help open up those doors of society. It was quite a rigid society, so it was hard to break in, especially if you were, emerging. They've just been, they come more from trade, and actually the aristocracy were quite stuffy about that. And it took often several generations to get into those higher echelons.
Several generations?
A couple,
Wow, okay.
So they're very lucky if they have an alliance with someone like Lady Ingram. You can't normally talk to someone if you haven't been introduced, and often the person who's higher up in society, you have to get permission from let's call her their ambassador, to see if they will talk to them. So it's so rigid that you can't just go up to a duke and just have a chat in the salon. Right. You have to be introduced and have connections in those days. In those days,
okay. Now, so we talked about the characters, but also 18th century Britain had rich culture, and you also delved into writing about it, such as, for example, ballrooms. And how did you manage to write about it so vividly? And can you explore, and did you explore these places in order for you to describe them so graphically?
Well, incidentally, another passion of my partner Michael and I is to visit National Trust properties. So these are amazing historical properties with a lot of history, and a lot of the volunteers who are at the National Trust, you can question them. They've got such knowledge. And we used to go and ask them to understand more about the various eras and the rooms. And incidentally, I actually visited Strawberry Hill, which is in Twickenham, and that features in my novel. And it's a white mock Gothic castle, which Horace Walpole, an MP, a very flamboyant writer, that was his home, essentially. So when visiting, I was conscious to understand even the construction of the building, because my scene that I set in the novel is in the library, and that was newly constructed at this precise moment in time. So my characters go in and they're basically admiring the new library which has been constructed. So I basically had questioned the volunteers at the National Trust, what did the Gothic castle look like, in those days, and so try and be authentic. That said, as I said, I think earlier, that you have to be careful not to, as a writer, be carried away as a tour guide. There needs to be reason for why you're giving these descriptions. And a good example is when one of my characters enters a ballroom, there's a painted fresco of a war waging above her head is a painting. And it's to sort of convey the awe and the grandeur of that particular room. But even on the floor, it's got the white and black checkered tiles on the floor. And that's because the political characters move across that ballroom like a chessboard. So chess is very strategic, as is the game of politics.
Very interesting. So, but not only did you describe, for example, ballrooms, but you also, in your book, you talked about London's chocolate houses. Now, I didn't know about this. Now, in the 18th century, was this a kind of a place where people would meet, such as tea and coffee houses of today? And again, how did you manage to create those senses that an individual would experience, which was really nice because it was their first time experiencing chocolate as well?
Absolutely. Well, I'm very interested in going to places that I haven't been to before in novels. So in terms of, I'd never read a novel with a chocolate house. I thought that was an intriguing place.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I did some research. There's a huge amount of information, by the way, online. The English Heritage has a deep dive into the history of hot chocolate or chocolate, and has the Museum of Hot Chocolate, which is actually a website online. And there's a rich history of chocolate, very much connected with empire, which is another reason why
Because was chocolate around in that time? Because chocolate had come from South America. Was that part of the East Indian trade as well?
Yes.
So it was being introduced into England at that time.
Absolutely. It was a huge luxury just for the elite, really. And it wasn't, you didn't have the classic chocolate bar that we have today. That was introduced in the 19th century. Instead, you have blocks of chocolate which were grated and melted into water or milk, and it was drunk as a beverage, actually, but very expensive. And but the chocolate houses were also a place for political debate, much like coffee houses were in those days. And interestingly, the chocolate house that I describe is called Gray's. That's an allusion to White's, which was a chocolate house, which eventually became a gentleman's club, which is in fact still around today. And I think David Cameron's father was the chairman, and I think King Charles, and Prince William are also members. So they're still very prevalent today, these members clubs.
Amazing how history still continues in these kind of places.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the book, you talk about a secret society. Now, this is where I suppose where the corruption could be coming from. But you mention about a historical abbey called the Medmenham Abbey, which is no longer an abbey. Tell us more. What made you come up with this idea about this abbey, and does it have history in your with the characters in your book? Then,
absolutely. So, it all came about because my partner Michael, again, you can see he's very influential in this book, pivotal actually. So he had heard that there was a secret society in the 18th century whose members included some of the most powerful people of the day, so the Prime Minister and Prince of Wales and even Benjamin Franklin. He had visited the club. So this was very intriguing to him, and he asked me...
Benjamin Franklin, just to... was the president of the USA at that time.
Extraordinary,
yes. Right.
Yes. So, exactly. So... extraordinary. So he wanted me to investigate this, these secret societies. So Dashwood, Sir Francis Dashwood, he's the Chancellor and at the time and Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he founded this secret society. It was a notorious hellfire club, and politicians could network. They could get drunk. They could party, do all sorts of things. It was very hedonistic. Let's put it that way. And Dashwood had a real taste for the theatrical. He was known to be an excellent host. He was fun and he was very popular in that society. And eventually he moved that society to the secret society to Medmenham Abbey, and he excavated under the Chiltern Hills to create this cave system. So he really got into the theatrics of it. And a lot of them were clothed as monks. Indeed, and they had different rituals and things. It was all very, dramatic and theatrical. But that he enjoyed that. Everyone sort of played.
He had a bit of a character.
He definitely did. Exactly, and you can just see in the novel. I interpret these caves and the society. I don't know all that happened there. I overlay my fictional assumptions. But you can just imagine when everyone gets together and all these politicians get together and talk, they're probably having a lot of fun, but there's probably some strategy going on as well.
Yes. And how much of the research did you do for this then? Did you go there? Did you explore, not, the Abbey, but the caves themselves?
Yes. Well, I haven't actually been to the caves. I would like to go to the caves.
Okay.
But I did watch a documentary online. There's a few documentaries, but there was a particularly good one online from the 1970s. It's quite meticulous, and there's local historians which have contributed to this documentary, and they really go step by step, detailing the rituals that they went through, and some of the rules and conventions in the society. It was almost like a log. So I got a very detailed picture, and they went into the caves, and so I could see what went on, and as much as the historians could glean, of course, from a secret society. And I also read some of those other source materials. So there's an 18th century work called The Adventure of the Guinea by Charles Johnston, and he writes about an incident at the society where a practical joke was played, where a baboon was masked and he was placed. I think you probably read this in the book.
I was a bit surprised.
I know. But it's actually a true story.
It is a true story.
To the source material.
Okay. It had a mask.
Apparently, yes. And
I think you should read the book, because it's quite funny. When I read, I was like, "What?"
I know.
And these are with the elites.
Yes.
And they would play these type of practical jokes. Yeah, it was very funny when I read that. I had to read that a second time because I didn't get it. I was like, really?
Yes, exactly. Actually, you're not the only one to say that, because other readers have said, I didn't actually understand that was actually... I thought it was something else that happened.
Exactly.
But it was revealed later that it is a practical joke, and that this baboon jumped out of a box and he grabs onto the Earl of Sandwich, who's screaming. Obviously, it's unexpected and horrific.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Consequence of Power is the first book in a season of books you wish to write. Are you writing a second book now?
Yes. Well, I'm researching a second book. And as I said, I like to weave true historical events and overlay them with my own fictional story. So there's a particularly colourful character in The Consequence of Power, the first story. And he's very mysterious. He's a true historical character who I'd like to explore. He's actually a spy and was in the service of the King of France.
Okay.
And their ventures take them across Europe, and they had great influence, and surprisingly, and their strategic manoeuvres appear to have been pulled off very sensationally. So I'm exploring that at the moment. I think it will be quite expansive and a psychological deep dive into this particular character. I've got the memoir of them, so I'm starting to read that. And
I didn't cotton on. Now, I like I said, I've read the book. I know about the character you're talking about.
Yes.
I didn't cotton on. About why he was in the book, but now I get it. I see. Okay, right.
Mysterious.
Yes, I see. Oh, interesting.
They might pop up later.
Okay, so some people might not understand what I'm talking about, but only you need to read the book.
Yes.
Consequences, but it's interesting. Okay, so you're doing more research on that, where you feel that the second novel will take us further on understanding another side of this, which you didn't talk about this before at all.
No, and also different, again, expanding on the discussion of power as well. But I want to read this person's memoir to really understand psychologically where they are coming from and their voice as well. And I want to be respectful of it as well, because it might actually be one of the most influential trans people in history, because to the extent that, and this is outrageous again, and the public were actually placing bets on the London Stock Exchange, speculating whether they were biologically male or female. And believe it or not, so right now I'm reading this individual's memoir to understand the psychological impact, and actually, they were a very influential and extraordinary figure. So I'm just interested in that, really. So I'll be researching it, and I want to do it very respectfully, of course, and also look into the power that this person has and how he played with the powers of various nations as well. And they were a spy as well, which was very useful, actually. The king could see they were very useful.
The king of
France.
Of France
used them because they were, slightly ambiguous.
Okay.
So it could be very helpful to him.
So something else that's going to be also introduced into the book as well.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Now, you have your own publishing house called Goose House Publishing. Now, if anyone would like to publish or get their book published, can they get advice and a service from Goose House Publishing then?
Well, I'd be very happy to chat with people who are interested in self-publishing. For me, it was quite a journey. So there were a lot of pitfalls and lessons learned. So currently I've just used this to publish my own novel. But I really want to connect with other authors too and have conversations. And when I published this novel, I didn't explore publishers in the traditional sense or agents, because I chose to research different methods of publishing, and also I was still trying to find my own voice and discovering my writing style. But I've learned so much that I think it's worth sharing with others. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the pitfalls, it was almost a whole business in itself, learning how to self-publish. But it's interesting. You can look on my author website. You can get in contact with me. That's sabrinalundofficial.com. But you also need to have something like an imprint or a publisher. When you're publishing on, say, Ingram Sparks, which is a platform for self-publishing, and other places, you do need something, sort of an imprint. So I used Goose House Publishing. And you also need it if you want to register your ISBN, for instance. Mm-hmm. So you buy it from Nelson's, where you get your ISBNs from. So I just used Goose because that's my nickname. Oh. But it's apparent to me that you can self-publish and you can have your books sold online at various shops like Blackwell's and Waterstones, and globally. I've sold in Germany. There's also, Sweden, Canada. The world opens up to you. But that said, there's a lot to be said of traditional publishers. Mm-hmm. because there's a lot of support for marketing, and they've got a lot of connections, and there's a whole other area there. But you've also got to understand margins. So when you're self-publishing, shops want a minimum of 55% discount, I understand. There's the cost of printing. So there's a lot to go into. Once you've written the manuscript, it doesn't end there.
See, so writing is one aspect of it, but I suppose as writers you don't really think about the publishing side because that's not of your interest. But it's a huge industry. It's very important to publish a book, and when you were going through this, you didn't think about it at the beginning. Is that what you're saying? But it was at some stage you had to start thinking about it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. You also have your own YouTube channel where you talk about books. You kind of review books as well. Tell us about your YouTube channel then.
Well, something I enjoy is something called BookTube, which is on YouTube, and it's where people discuss book recommendations, and I keep up to date with a lot of the latest releases there. So a lot of my recent recommendations and author discoveries has been through BookTube. So I thought, since I'm widely read, I thought I might participate in the discussion and share my own thoughts on top novels that I've read. I also hope in time to have sort of some debates and discussions with different people on various themes, for example, on my own novel. Which, fortunately, we've actually been able to do a deep dive today, which is a great privilege. But I've reached out to a psychologist. There's also a poet priest who's on YouTube, who I'm keen to hear their point of view, and to come to my home studio and critically debate and analyse. So it's just to sort of discuss different themes and such. So BookTube is a well-loved area of YouTube from my point of view.
I see. Yeah. Okay, right. So that's your YouTube channel. You're also reviewing books as well. So you're finding other people who can give you advice about characters, I suppose, because it's not always easy to understand characters. But it's a good place to find people then as well. Oh yes, it's a great community, as is Bookstagram, which is Instagram. Okay, that's a very lively community. Also recommending books, and you discuss books together. Right. Interestingly. Okay. Now, I thought I would take this opportunity to ask you this question. It's a big debate, I suppose, regarding AI. Now, what are your views on AI for writing books, and can AI resonate with readers? And do you have concerns for the future of books written by AI? Absolutely. So really, I think it's a discussion on the value of human creativity. So I think it would be a shame to lose the human connection. It would be hard, for instance, for an AI to have the same discussion that we're having today on author motivations and backgrounds. And that's something that I'm interested in. When I'm reading a novel, I often research the author's background. I want to understand Jane Austen's background and how that's influenced the novel. Yes. So that's quite hard to do with an AI in that particular respect. But AI is like an express train. It's happening. You and I are not going to be able to stop it. We're not CEOs of tech companies. We're not governments. But there's also a very important debate happening right now on copyright. And there's a lot of high-profile novelists and musicians, such as Elton John, George Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, John Grisham. There's many novelists who are participating in this debate because as well as actors as well. Yes, yeah. They went on strike about it. The writers, so for films, absolutely, yes. So it's a huge debate because there's an exception in AI, whereby AIs can train their models with copyrighted content, and there's been demonstrations in London even about this. So the debate is that the House of Commons currently appears to be concerned that if we don't allow AI to develop
using this copyrighted material, that would hinder and disadvantage the UK globally, because other countries are going to use copyrighted material anyway. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter what our legislation says, they're going to use it. So that's going to hinder the UK. But the bigger picture is that we're in a sort of metaphorical arms race. And if we're not ahead, this will impact our economy if we're not ahead of other nations. But my biggest concern for society is the loss of jobs. I think that's a concern of lots of people, and the human connection. So, in fact, tech companies are moving faster than legislation and regulation ever can, and that's a danger to society in general. That said, there's lots of positives to AI, I'm sure. And, I've even had fun on my YouTube channel interviewing Mr. Collins from Pride and Prejudice. He's out of copyright, so we're on safe ground there. So you can have some fun, but I think you need to be cautious as well.
But what about, we've had record, let's say, for example, singers, Taylor Swift, they've had record people buying their tickets to go and see them live. Do you not think that people will pay more to see or to know that it's not done by AI? So if a writer is genuine, they've written their book, do you not think that people will distinguish between the two and say, well, I will pay the extra amount, for example, going to see, I don't know, Taylor Swift in, these music concerts. Or, for example, if it's a film, knowing that it's not an AI, do you not think that people will think that this is going to be much more real?
Oh, I hope so. I hope that is the case. That might be what our generation is thinking. I don't know how this will evolve. I hope that the human connection has value in that respect. Yes, I would definitely like to see.
Because one thing AI can't do is connect.
Exactly.
And that connection does come from an individual. So when you're writing a book, that's you writing a book.
Exactly, yes.
AI can try to mimic, but can they really do... can they take so much away that it could cause problems for the future?
I think it could do a very good job at mimicking, and maybe even do better than some humans, But then there's a psychological aspect of, if we know that it's an AI versus if we know it's a human, that's a different aspect. I think maybe there should be some legislation where there's a labeling that this is an AI or this is a human, because there could be a lot of confusion. Like, sometimes you're on the phone, you don't know if you're speaking to a human or an AI.
Yes.
That's genuinely the case nowadays.
Yes.
And it might become even more advanced.
But the problem comes is that if it's, for example, 50% AI and 50% human, how do you distinguish what is... whether it's which legislation that goes towards. I don't know. It's a big debate, but it's interesting, and I just always like to know people from their understanding of what AI could cause in the future, harm, or, as you mentioned, for example, losing jobs, and it could play an effect.
Yeah.
But legislation, you think, is something very important in this industry.
So, but if it can move fast enough,
it needs to move faster. Yeah, sure thing. Okay, look, that comes to the end of the Community Hour. Thank you very much for coming onto the show and talking about it. It's always great that we do get someone who can actually give us the insight on what they are passionate about, and clearly you are passionate about writing, and we really do look forward to your next book. So your first one, Consequence of Power. Where can people buy it then? It's easy.
Yes, it's readily available online. It's on Amazon. It's on Blackwell's, Waterstones. If you Google my name, actually, it will come up.
Which is Sabrina Lund, Lund.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a little bit of a shout out for Michael, your partner, who designed the front cover. Am I right?
He did.
For that?
That's very good.
Well done, Michael. Okay. Thank you very much for coming onto the show in the Community Hour, and hopefully we will get you back when you write your second book as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a delight.
Really appreciate it. Okay. That's bye-bye for now.
That was a very, very interesting Community Hour, I have to say, because I'm only going to say it once, you know that.
Where do I find them, eh?
Where do you find them? That was really interesting, and a lot of that actually resonated when I done my first book, and the perils of getting your book out there and promoting it, and
the research and the stuff you're doing, and
absolutely.
Is it making sense and all of that?
Yes.
It's really tough.
It's really tough, and what I loved about Sabrina, the best bit about it was a lot of us really just think an author is just an author, but she has such a vast, varied a background which is like goes, you would never think this is an author.
Yes,
but she's come from a long way to do all of this, and it's just amazing the sort of things that that she's been doing beforehand, and now she's come up to do this,
and also talking about the history which we don't talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she's been very brave to talk about it.
It is, yeah.
And done a lot of research.
Yeah, as I was talking to her, earlier on, history is written by the victor. And there's a lot of things that we don't learn.